The Grand Assembly Chamber floated in the cold darkness of space, a massive station that orbited the neutral world of Varanthos Prime like a metal moon that never slept. Inside the chamber, representatives from 4,000 different alien species had gathered for what they believed would be the most important moment in galactic history. And the air hummed with tension as creatures of every shape and size took their designated seats in the vast circular hall that stretched for kilometers in every direction. High Arbiter Veltorix of the Crethony Dominion stood at the central podium, his forearms folded across his armored chest as his compound eyes scanned the assembly with cold satisfaction. He was a being of ancient power, leader of a species that had conquered 100 worlds, and today he would finally deal with the problem that had troubled the Council for 50 long years. The problem was humanity. When the humans had first stumbled onto the galactic stage half a century ago, the Council had watched them with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. These soft, fragile creatures came from a world so dangerous that galactic surveys had classified it as a Category 7 death world, a place where the very air could burn, where water fell from the sky like weapons, and where predators lurked in every shadow. The humans should have died on that terrible world, but somehow they had survived, and somehow they had built ships, and somehow they had reached the stars. The Council had allowed them to join as a minor member, expecting them to be grateful and obedient, but humanity had proven to be neither of those things. Instead, they had spread across forbidden death worlds that no other species would touch. They had refused to disarm their horrifying nuclear weapons. And worst of all, they had introduced something they called free trade that was disrupting economies across the galaxy. Veltorix raised one of his arms, and the chamber fell silent as every eye and sensor turned toward him. "Fellow members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the massive hall. "We have tolerated the human infestation for too long, and today we take action." He activated the holographic display behind him, and a list of human crimes scrolled across the screen in glowing letters that every species could read. Crime 1. Colonization of 17 forbidden worlds in direct violation of the Territorial Preservation Act. Crime 2. Refusal to disarm weapons of mass destruction as required by the Peaceful Species Accord. Crime 3. Introduction of predatory economic practices that have destabilized 47 member economies. Crime 4. Consumption of other living organisms in what they call cooking, a practice so barbaric that our scientists still cannot believe it. The list went on, and with each new crime the assembly grew more agitated. Species that had been enemies for millennia now found common ground in their hatred of humanity. And by the time Veltorix finished reading the list, the chamber was filled with angry shouts and demands for action. Therefore, Veltorix declared with triumph in his voice, "By unanimous vote of the Council leadership, I hereby declare a state of total war against the species known as humanity. And we shall not rest until every human world burns and every human ship is dust." The chamber erupted in cheers, and the sound was deafening as thousands of alien voices celebrated what they believed would be an easy victory. But in one small section of the assembly, a group of 5 humans sat in complete silence, and they were not cheering. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was a woman of 50 years with gray streaks in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life filled with more joy than sorrow. She had served humanity for 3 decades, first as a soldier, then as a diplomat, and she had seen many strange things in her time among the stars. But this was perhaps the strangest of all. She looked at her aides, and they looked back at her, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Then Lieutenant Commander Park let out a small snort, and that snort turned into a chuckle, and that chuckle became a laugh. Within seconds, all 5 humans were laughing. Not the nervous laughter of the terrified, but the genuine belly-deep laughter of people who had just heard the funniest joke in the universe. The chamber fell silent once more as every alien turned to stare at the human delegation with confusion and disbelief painted across their strange faces. Valtoric's compound eyes narrowed as he watched the humans laugh, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Ambassador Vasquez, do you find the destruction of your species amusing?" Elena wiped tears from her eyes and struggled to compose herself as she stood to address the assembly. "Hi, Arbiter," she said with a smile still playing on her lips. "I apologize for the outburst, but you have to understand something about humans." She paused and looked around the chamber at the thousands of alien faces watching her. "We have been imagining this moment for 300 years. Before we even knew aliens existed, we were making stories about it, writing books about it, creating games about it. We have spent centuries asking ourselves what we would do if aliens ever declared war on humanity." Her smile widened. "And now that it has finally happened, I have to say the reality is so much funnier than we ever imagined." Valtorix slammed his fist against the podium. "You dare to mock the might of 4,000 species united against you?" Elena shrugged with the casual ease of someone who had faced death many times and learned not to fear it. "Hi, Arbiter. You think you know what you are starting, but you do not. You see humanity as weak because we are small and soft, but you have made a mistake that every predator on our homeworld learned the hard way." She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something cold and hard. "We did not become the dominant species on a death world by being easy to kill." Then she straightened up and a smile returned. "But please, proceed with your little war. I am sure it will be very educational for everyone involved." She sat back down and pulled out a small device, and her fingers moved across its screen. Within minutes, the declaration of war had been transmitted to Earth. And within hours, the human response had spread across every communication network in the galaxy. It was not a formal diplomatic reply. It was a flood of images and videos that the humans called memes, and they showed humanity not crying or panicking but laughing at the very idea that the Galactic Council thought they could win. One popular image showed a human child pointing at the Council logo and giggling. Another showed a group of human soldiers with the caption, "They have 4,000 species. We have been waiting for this since Roswell." The official response from Earth came 12 hours later, delivered by the United Earth President herself in a broadcast that every species in the galaxy watched with growing unease. "To the Galactic Council," she said with perfect calm, "we have received your declaration of war and we acknowledge your concerns. We will be happy to discuss this matter at your convenience, but our schedule is quite full at the moment, so we will have to pencil you in." She smiled the same smile that Elena had worn. "In the meantime, we suggest you study your history and learn what happened to enemy who ever underestimated humanity. The list is long, but the lesson is always the same." The broadcast ended and the galaxy was left in stunned silence. They had expected terror. They had expected pleas for mercy. They had expected humanity to recognize its doom and beg for survival. Instead, humanity had laughed at them, and somewhere deep in his ancient mind, Valtorix felt the first cold touch of something he had not experienced in 1,000 years. It was doubt. The news of war reached Earth on a Tuesday morning, and the world did not panic. Admiral James Okonkwo received the official notification while he was eating breakfast with his daughter and granddaughter in his small apartment on Luna Base. And he read the message twice before setting down his coffee cup with a sigh that carried the weight of 60 years of military service. "What is it, Grandpa?" his granddaughter asked with curiosity in her young eyes. James looked at her and smiled the tired smile of a man who had hoped he would never have to fight again. "Nothing to worry about, little one. Just some silly aliens who think they can scare us." 2 hours later, he stood before the United Earth Defense Council in the massive underground bunker beneath Geneva, and around him sat the most powerful military minds humanity had ever produced. Ladies and gentlemen, James said as he activated the holographic display, the Galactic Council has declared war on humanity. They are assembling an armada of 12 species, approximately 10,000 warships, and they plan to strike our outer colonies within 6 weeks. He paused and looked around the room at faces that showed no fear. Any questions? General Maria Santos of the Americas Division raised her hand. Do we have time to finish our coffee first? Laughter rippled through the room, and James allowed himself a small smile. I believe we do, General. In fact, I am canceling the emergency protocols that were automatically activated. We will proceed with our standard war preparation procedures at a calm and measured pace. Admiral Chun Wei of the Pacific Fleet leaned forward with a gleam in his eye. Sir, are we really going to take this slowly? James nodded. The aliens expect us to panic. They expect us to make mistakes in our fear. We will give them neither. Instead, we will show them something they have never seen before. What is that, sir? Humans who have been waiting for this moment their entire lives. The meeting continued for 3 more hours as they discussed strategy and logistics and deployment schedules. But there was no panic in the room, no fear, no desperation. These were humans who had trained for alien invasion since they were children, who had grown up with stories of Independence Days and last stands in humanity rising against impossible odds. They had been born for this. Across human space, the news spread like wildfire. But instead of chaos, there was something else. Something the watching aliens could not understand. There was excitement. On Earth, the factories began their transformation with an efficiency that shocked the galactic observers who had placed spy satellites in orbit. Civilian production lines that had been making cars and appliances shifted to military hardware in days, not months. And workers who had never touched a weapon suddenly remembered the training they had received in school. Every human child learned basic survival skills and combat readiness from the age of 10. It was a tradition that dated back to the early days of space colonization when every colony had to be ready to defend itself. The aliens had called it barbaric, but now that barbarism was paying dividends. On Mars, the Colonial Defense Network activated its hidden weapons platforms, and the Red Planet bristled with missiles and beam weapons that had been disguised as mining equipment for decades. The Martian colonists were a tough breed, descended from the first pioneers who attained the dead world with nothing but determination and spite, and they welcomed the coming war with grim smiles. On the asteroid belt, the mining families gathered in their great, hollowed-out rocks and spoke of ancient grudges and debts unpaid. They were the descendants of criminals and outcasts who had been sent to the belt when Earth had no room for them, and they had never forgotten how the inner planets had treated them. But they were still human, and when humanity called, they answered. Veterans emerged from retirement across every human world. Men and women who had fought in the corporate wars and the colonial rebellions and the brief, terrible conflict with the breakaway Titan faction. They were old now, their bodies worn and scarred, but their eyes still carried that spark that the aliens had no word for. It was the light of people who had seen the worst that war could offer and had chosen to keep fighting anyway. In the intelligence centers of Earth, the analysts worked day and night to process information that they had been gathering for 50 years. From the moment humanity had joined the Galactic Council, they had been watching, learning, cataloging every species and every weakness and every possible threat. They had files on every council member. They had detailed analyses of alien psychology and alien tactics and alien technology. They had war game simulations that covered every possible scenario from a single species attack to a full galactic invasion. The aliens thought they were starting a war, but humanity had been preparing for this war since before they knew aliens existed. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park sat in the intelligence center on Luna base and scrolled through the latest reports from their alien sources. Yes, Humanity had sources in the council, species who had grown tired of the old order and were willing to share information for the right price. "Admiral," she said as James entered the room, "we have confirmed the enemy fleet composition. 12 species, 10,000 ships, commanded by High Arbiter Veltorix himself." James studied the holographic display and nodded slowly. "What do we know about Veltorix?" "He is old, sir, very old. He has commanded fleets for over 1,000 years, and he has never lost a major battle. He's arrogant, and he is ruthless, and he believes that overwhelming force is the answer to every problem." "Good." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Good, sir?" James smiled the smile of a hunter who had just spotted his prey. "He has never fought humans, Commander. He has never faced an enemy who fights dirty, who refuses to follow the rules, who would rather die than surrender." He pointed to the fleet display. "He brings 10,000 ships because he thinks numbers will win this war. But we are not going to fight the war he is expecting. We are going to fight the war that humans have always fought." "And what war is that, sir?" "The kind where we make the enemy regret every choice that led them to our door." On the frontier worlds, the evacuation orders went out, but not everyone left. On Kepler 442b, the colonists held a vote and decided to stay. To fight, to show the galaxy what humans were made of. They were 12,000 people against an armada, and they knew they would probably die. But they also knew that their deaths would mean something. They would be the first to bleed the enemy, the first to teach the Council that human space was not a place to be taken lightly. The colony leader, a grizzled woman named Rosa Chun, who had lost her arm in a mining accident and refused to get it regrown because she liked the cybernetic replacement better, addressed her people on the eve of the invasion. "They think we are soft," she said with fire in her eyes. "They think we are weak. They think that because we laugh and love and create art that we have forgotten how to fight." She raised her metal fist. "Let us remind them what our ancestors knew, what every predator on Earth learned, what every enemy of humanity has discovered too late." Her voice rose to a roar. "We are the children of a death world, and we do not go quietly." The colony erupted in cheers, and Rosa smiled the fierce smile of a woman who had made peace with death long ago. Far away in the approaching armada, Veltorix received reports of human activity and dismissed them with contempt. The humans were scurrying about like insects, he thought, trying desperately to prepare for a storm they could not survive. He did not understand the storm was not coming for humanity. The storm was humanity, and it was just beginning to wake up. The Council Armada emerged from hyperspace like a wave of death. 10,000 warships that blotted out the stars themselves as they took position around the Kepler 442 system. High Arbiter Veltorix stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and surveyed the enemy forces with his compound eyes. The humans had gathered 200 ships to defend the system, a pitiful number that would be swept away like dust before a hurricane. "Scan the enemy formation," he ordered his tactical officer. "Scanning now, High Arbiter. 200 vessels, mixed classes, primitive weapons by our standards. Estimated combat effectiveness is negligible." Veltorix allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would be even easier than he had expected. "Open a channel to the human commander." The view screen flickered and a human face appeared. A woman with short gray hair and a metal arm that gleamed in the light of her bridge. She was smiling, and Veltorix found the expression deeply unsettling for reasons he could not explain. "This is Colony Leader Rosa Chun of Kepler 442b, the human said, "and you must be the famous Veltorix. I have heard so much about you." "Human," Veltorix replied with cold authority. "You are outnumbered 50 to 1. Surrender now, and I will grant your people a quick death. Resist, and I will make an example of your world that the galaxy will remember for 1,000 years." Rosa laughed, and it was the same laugh that Ambassador Vasquez had laughed in the council chamber. "High Arbiter, I appreciate the offer, but I think I will decline. You see, we have been waiting for you, and it would be rude to let you come all this way without giving you a proper welcome." She leaned forward, and her eyes went hard. "You picked the wrong species." The transmission ended, and Veltorix felt that cold touch of doubt again, but he pushed it aside. Numbers did not lie, and he had the numbers. "All ships," he commanded, "advance and destroy." The Armada surged forward, and the human fleet moved to meet them, and what happened next would become legend across the galaxy. The humans did not fight like any species the Council had ever faced. They did not form neat battle lines and exchange fire at optimal range. Instead, they scattered like a school of fish, darting and weaving through the Armada in patterns that made no tactical sense. "What are they doing?" Veltorix demanded as his sensors struggled to track the chaotic human movements. "Unknown, High Arbiter. Their tactics do not match any known combat doctrine." A human frigate screamed past the Eternal Dominion at impossible speed, and Veltorix watched in disbelief as it crashed directly into a Council cruiser. The two ships exploded in a ball of fire and debris, and the human pilot had been laughing on an open channel as he died. "They are ramming us!" The tactical officer shouted with panic in his voice. It was true. Across the battle space, human ships were deliberately colliding with Council vessels, trading one for one with manic glee. The humans were throwing away their lives like they meant nothing. But they did mean something. Each ramming attack took out a Council ship, and the humans were targeting the most valuable vessels, the carriers and the command ships and the supply transports. "Fire at will!" Veltorix screamed. "Destroy them all." The Council fleet unleashed a storm of weapons fire that lit up the void, and human ships began to explode. But for every human ship that died, it seemed like two more appeared from nowhere. They were not actually appearing from nowhere. The humans had hidden ships in the asteroid field, powered down and silent, and now they were activating one by one, ambushing Council vessels from behind. "Contact on the port side," a sensor officer called out. "Contact on starboard." Multiple contacts emerging from the debris field. The orderly advance had become chaos, and the Council ships were firing in every direction, as humans attacked from angles that should have been impossible. Rosa Chun watched the battle from her command bunker on the planet below, and she smiled as she saw her plan unfold. They could not win this fight. She knew that, but winning was not the point. The point was to make the Council bleed. "Launch the Ghost Fleet," she ordered. 100 unmanned ships activated and accelerated toward the Council Armada. They were empty hulks filled with explosives and scrap metal, programmed to seek out the largest targets and detonate. "More human ships incoming," the Eternal Dominion sensor officer reported. "Destroy them." The Council ships opened fire on the Ghost Fleet, but the unmanned vessels were small and fast and hard to hit, and for every one that was destroyed, 3 more slipped through. The explosions rippled through the Armada like a chain of fire, and Veltorix watched in horror as ship after ship was torn apart by the primitive but effective human weapons. Then came the boarding parties. Veltorix had heard reports of human ground combat, but he had dismissed them as exaggeration. No civilized species fought hand-to-hand anymore, not when weapons could kill from 1,000 kilometers away. But the humans were not civilized. Breaching pods slammed into Council ships, and human soldiers poured out with weapons blazing. They were wearing armor that made them look like demons from a nightmare, and they moved with a speed and ferocity that the Council troops could not match. On the cruiser Starfall, Commander Threx of the Valorian Confederation watched his soldiers fall as humans stormed through his ship. The invaders were not just killing, they were taking prisoners, capturing officers, and downloading data from computer systems. "Fight them!" Thrax screamed at his retreating troops. But his soldiers had never faced anything like this. The humans were relentless, advancing through corridors that were filled with defensive fire like it did not matter, stepping over their own dead without even pausing. And they were talking to each other, joking and laughing like they were playing a game instead of fighting a battle. "Hey, Martinez, bet you 5 credits I get more kills than you." "You are on, but headshots only." Thrax listened to the intercepted communications with growing horror. These creatures were insane, actually insane, and they were winning. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, the Council had taken the system, but the victory tasted like ash. They had lost 4,000 ships, 40% of the armada, against a force 1/50th their size. The human fleet had been destroyed, yes, but it had taken far more than it should have, and the surviving Council commanders were shaken to their cores. Veltorix stood on his damaged bridge and stared at the casualty reports with eyes that could not believe what they were seeing. "This is impossible," he whispered. Then a final transmission came through from the planet below, from Rosa Chun, who had somehow survived the orbital bombardment in her reinforced bunker. "Hey, Veltorix," she said with blood on her face and fire in her eyes. "That was fun. Same time next week?" She laughed, and the transmission ended. The surviving human forces retreated in good order, escaping through routes the Council did not know existed. And as they fled, they broadcast one message to every ship in the Armada. That was the warm-up. Veltorix ordered his fleet to regroup and continue the advance, but something had changed. His soldiers were no longer confident, no longer eager. They had seen what humans could do, and they were afraid. The war had barely begun, and already the Council was learning that they had made a terrible mistake. The Council Armada pressed forward into human space, but something was wrong. Supply convoys that should have arrived never came. Scout ships that were sent to investigate disappeared without a trace. Entire squadrons reported anomalies in their sensors before going silent forever. Veltorix stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and studied the tactical display with growing frustration. His fleet had won every battle since Kepler 442, pushing the humans back system by system, but each victory cost more than it should, and his supply lines were crumbling behind him. "Report on the 3rd Supply Fleet," he ordered. His communications officer worked his console with trembling appendages. "No contact, High Arbiter. They were scheduled to arrive 2 cycles ago, but we have received no transmissions." Another fleet gone, another mystery, another hole in the supply chain that was supposed to keep his armada fighting. Veltorix slammed his fist against the arm of his command chair. Find them! But they would not find them. The 3rd Supply Fleet was drifting in the void, every ship disabled. Every crew member captured by human raiders who had appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. The humans called them wolf packs, small groups of fast ships that hunted behind enemy lines, striking supply convoys and isolated squadrons with surgical precision. They never engaged in straight fights, never gave the Council a chance to bring their superior numbers to bear. They just bit and ran, bleeding the Armada one cut at a time. Far behind the front lines, in the heart of Council space itself, something even more dangerous was happening. Admiral James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the UES, defiant, and watched as his Black Ops fleet emerged from hyperspace above the slave world of Korthax Prime. The Korthani were a species that had been conquered by the Krethni Dominion 3,000 years ago. They had been servants and soldiers for Veltorix's people ever since, forbidden to own property or hold positions of power. But the Korthani remembered what freedom felt like. "Open a channel to the resistance leaders," James ordered. A moment later, a Korthani face appeared on the screen. It was a female with 4 arms like the Krethani, but with softer features and eyes that burned with hope. "Admiral Okonkwo," she said with emotion thick in her voice, "we have waited for this day for generations. Is it truly time?" James smiled. "It is time, Resistance Leader Veth." My people are ready to help you take back your world." The liberation of Korthax Prime took 3 days, and when it was over, the Krethany garrison was in chains, and the Korthany flag flew over their capital for the first time in 3 millennia. It was not the only world that rose. Across the galaxy, species that had been oppressed by council members for thousands of years suddenly found themselves with weapons, with training, with human advisors who taught them how to fight and how to win. The Velith of Sigma 7, enslaved by the Valorian Confederation. The Tarn of the Obsidian Belt, worked to death in Krethany mines. The Gentle Ones of Paradise, a peaceful species nearly driven to extinction by council expansion. All of them, and dozens more, rose up at the same time, coordinated by human intelligence networks that had been building for 50 years. Ambassador Elena Vasquez watched the reports come in from her office on Earth and allowed herself a moment of pride. This had been the plan all along, the secret strategy that no one in the Council had suspected. From the moment humanity had joined the galactic community, they had been looking for allies. Not among the powerful species who ran the Council, but among the forgotten ones, the conquered ones, the ones who had nothing left to lose. They had found so many. Every trade mission had been an opportunity to make contact. Every diplomatic visit had been a chance to plant seeds of rebellion. Every human tourist had been a potential recruiter for the cause. The Council thought they were fighting humanity alone, that they were fighting something much bigger. They were fighting every species they had ever wronged, every people they had ever crushed, every world they had ever stolen. Veltorix received the news of the uprisings while his armada was deep in human space, and for the first time in his ancient life, he felt true fear. "High Arbiter," his communications officer reported with terror in his voice. "We have lost contact with 17 colony worlds. Rebellions have broken out in every sector. The Valorian Confederation is requesting emergency assistance." Veltorix stared at the tactical display as red icons spread across council space like a disease. "This is impossible," he said, "for the second time in this war. The humans do not have the ships for this." "It is not just humans, High Arbiter. The rebels are being led by Korthany, by Velith, by species we conquered generations ago." The truth hit Veltorix like a physical blow. The humans had not been defending at all. From the moment war was declared, they had been attacking, but not where the Council expected. They had struck at the foundations of Council power, turning the oppressed into allies and the conquered into soldiers. The Armada was trapped far from home, with enemies on every side and supply lines that no longer existed. "We must retreat," Admiral Threx of the Valorian Confederation said in an emergency council of war. "We must save our homeworlds before it is too late." "No!" Veltorix roared. "We cannot show weakness. If we retreat now, the humans will pursue. They will pursue anyway. At least if we retreat, we can save something." The council commanders argued and shouted while their worlds burned behind them, and they did not notice the new contacts appearing on their sensors until it was too late. Admiral Okonkwo had timed it perfectly. The main Earth fleet, 3,000 ships that had been held in reserve since the war began, emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. They had come through routes that the Council did not know existed, using navigation data provided by rebel species who knew every secret path in the galaxy. "This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Earth Defense Force." He broadcast on all frequencies to the Council Armada. "You are surrounded, outnumbered, and very far from home. Your supply lines are gone. Your allies have turned against you, and your homeworlds are in flames." He paused and let the words sink in. "I suggest you consider your options very carefully." Veltorix stared at the display as the human fleet took position around his battered armada. They were not attacking, not yet, just waiting like predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. The High Arbiter of the Krethany Dominion, conqueror of 100 worlds, had led his people into a trap, and there was no way out. In the rebel camps across the galaxy, freed slaves watched the broadcasts and cheered. The humans had promised them freedom, and the humans had delivered. The old order was crumbling, and something new was being born in its place. Something better. The Galactic Council chamber lay in ruins, its great dome cracked and its halls empty of the thousands who had once gathered there to rule the stars. Valtorix stood in the center of the shattered assembly floor, his forearms hanging limp at his sides as he watched the human delegation approach through the debris. He had surrendered 3 days ago when it became clear that there was no path to victory, only destruction. His armada was gone, captured or destroyed. His homeworld was occupied by Korthny liberators who had once been slaves. Everything he had built over 1,000 years had crumbled to dust in a matter of months. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked toward him with her aides behind her, and her boots crunched on the broken glass and fallen stone that littered the floor. She looked older than she had in the council chamber when this all began, worn by the weight of war, but her eyes were still bright and her smile was still ready. "High Arbiter Valtorix," she said as she stopped before him. "We meet again." Valtorix could not bring himself to look at her. "You have won, Ambassador. Humanity has defeated the greatest military alliance in galactic history. What more do you want?" Elena studied him for a long moment. "That is the question, is it not? What do we want?" She turned and gestured to the ruined chamber around them. "My people have the power to destroy everything the Council built. We have weapons that could turn your homeworld into ash, fleets that could hunt down every ship that flies your flag, allies who have spent 3,000 years dreaming of revenge." Valtorix finally looked up and met her eyes. "Then why are we still talking? Why am I still alive?" Elena smiled, and it was not the sharp smile of a conqueror, but the gentle smile of a teacher. "Because, High Arbiter, we are not monsters." She walked past him to the podium where he had once stood to declare war on humanity, and she climbed the steps to stand where he had stood. "When we first learned that aliens existed, we were afraid. We had spent centuries imagining what would happen if hostile forces came to our world. And most of those imaginings ended in fire and death. But we also imagined something else." She looked out at the empty chamber. "We imagined what it would be like to meet species who were different from us, who saw the universe in ways we could not, who had art and music and stories that we had never heard. We imagined friends out here among the stars." Her voice softened. "You showed us your worst, High Arbiter. You showed us conquest and slavery and the crushing of those who were weaker. But we choose to believe that there is more to your species than that, more to every species than the ugliest parts of their history." Valtorix shook his head. "You are naive, Ambassador. The galaxy is cruel, and mercy is a weakness that will be exploited." "Perhaps," Elena agreed, "but cruelty breeds cruelty, and vengeance breeds vengeance. If we glass your worlds and enslave your people, we will become what we fought against, and someday another young species will rise up and do to us what we did to you." She stepped down from the podium and approached him again. "We have a different idea." She pulled out a datapad and handed it to him. "These are our terms for peace. Read them." Valtorix took the pad with trembling hands and scanned the document. As he read, his compound eyes grew wider and wider. "This cannot be right," he whispered. "It is. You are not demanding territory? We are not. You are not demanding tribute or slaves or resources. We are not. You are not even demanding disarmament?" Elena shook her head. "All we ask is that the Council disbands. Every species will be free to govern themselves without interference. The slave worlds will be liberated and given independence. And a new assembly will be created, one where every species has an equal voice, no matter how old or young or powerful or weak." Valtorix stared at the terms like they were written in a language he could not understand. Why would you do this? You have every right to destroy us. We tried to exterminate your kind. Elena took the pad back from him and set it aside. My grandfather was a soldier in a war on Earth, a terrible war that killed millions of people. When it was over, his country could have destroyed the enemy completely, could have salted the earth and made sure they never rose again. She met his eyes. Instead, they helped rebuild. They sent food and medicine and teachers. They made friends of enemies. And within a generation, the nations that had tried to destroy each other became the closest allies in history. She placed a hand on his armored shoulder. Humans learned long ago that the greatest victory is not destroying your enemy, but making them irrelevant. You cannot destroy an idea with weapons. You cannot bomb hatred out of existence. But you can build something new, something better, something that makes the old conflicts seem petty and small. Valtorix stood in silence for a long time, processing what she had said. His entire worldview was built on the idea that strength was the only thing that mattered, that mercy was weakness, that the strong must dominate or be dominated. But the humans had proven that wrong. They had defeated the Council not through overwhelming force, but through cleverness and courage and something else, something he was only beginning to understand. They had won because they had made friends. "I do not understand you," he finally said. "I have lived for 1,000 years and conquered 100 worlds, and I do not understand how you can show mercy to those who tried to kill you." Elena smiled. "That is because you have never met humans before. We contain multitudes, High Arbiter. We are capable of terrible violence, yes, but we are also capable of terrible compassion." She extended her hand in the human gesture of friendship. "The war is over. What happens next is up to you. You can hold on to your hate and spend the rest of your long life dreaming of revenge that will never come, or you can help us build something new." Valtorix looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out with one of his forearms and took it. The war ended not with a bang, but with a handshake, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the months that followed, human ships spread across the stars, but they did not carry weapons. They carried food and medicine and building supplies. They helped rebuild the worlds that had been damaged in the fighting, and they helped the newly freed species establish their own governments. The Corthini built their first parliament and elected their first leaders in 3,000 years. The Velith opened schools where their children could learn without fear. The gentle ones of paradise returned to their homeworld and began to heal from the trauma of near extinction. And everywhere they went, the humans made friends. They traded and taught and learned, sharing their culture and absorbing the cultures of others. Rosa Chun, who had survived the Battle of Kepler 442b, became the first human ambassador to the Crethini, and she and Valtorix developed an unlikely friendship. The old conqueror found himself fascinated by human history, by the stories of empires that had risen and fallen and given way to something better. Admiral Okonkwo retired to Luna with his family and spent his remaining years writing his memoirs, which became required reading in military academies across the galaxy. Not because they taught tactics, but because they taught wisdom. Ambassador Vasquez was elected the first president of the Galactic Assembly, a position she held for 20 years before stepping down to work on interspecies relations full-time. And on a small world on the edge of human space, a Crethini child and a human child played together in a garden, their parents watching with smiles that bridged the gap between species. The Crethini child held a small toy that the human child had given her, a simple stuffed animal from Earth, and she treasured it like the most precious thing in the universe. The humans had shown the galaxy that there was another way, a way that did not require conquest and domination and fear. It was not an easy way, and there were still conflicts and disagreements and moments when the old hatreds threatened to resurface. But every time darkness threatened to consume them, the people of the galaxy remembered what the humans had taught them. They remembered the laughter in the council chamber. They remembered the courage at Kepler 442. They remembered the mercy in the ruins. And they chose to be better. The Galactic Council had declared war on humanity, and humanity had laughed. But the last laugh was not about victory. The last laugh was about hope.